See, when I was a brand new aircraft commander flying a C-130, I had this young loadmaster and his name was Zach. Young man was barely 19 years old, barely out of high school, but he was extremely sharp. He could set up and break down a cargo load, calculate our weight and balance, and he could configure the aircraft faster than dudes that were like 10 years older than him. But every time that we sat down to do a mission brief, he sat there in silence, his arms crossed, quiet, and he would barely say a word. And my initial thought was that he was disengaged. I thought he didn't care, and I realized I was wrong, dead wrong. And it was this one night that I figured out what was actually going on, and it almost cost us a high-profile mission. See, most leaders, they think that motivation is something that you give people, something that you pump up in a meeting, you slap them with a pizza party, or you give them a pep talk and there's this mandatory fun and it sticks. But here's the truth from 30,000 feet. Your people are already motivated. The problem is not that they don't care. The problem is you have not figured out what drives them. And that gap between what you think motivates your team and what actually does is costing you your best people. My name is Jason Harris, and I spent nearly 30 years in the Air Force flying every type of mission, from training missions to combat operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Horn of Africa. I've flown 11 combat deployments, flown over 470 combat missions. I've commanded a squadron, and I've graduated from the United States Air Force Academy. And today, I fly the Boeing 777 for American Airlines with nearly 300 people behind me. I have also taken what I learned in the cockpit to companies like Caterpillar, Lockheed Martin, and Ford, and others. What I have seen over and over is this: the organizations that win are not the ones with the best strategy. They're the ones where people actually trust each other. And most leaders, they have no idea how to build that level of trust. In this video today, we're going to be talking about motivation, why most leaders get it completely wrong, and what I learned at 25,000 feet about what actually drives your team. You see, that young man, Zach, he taught me 3 things about motivation that I have carried with me from the cockpit to the boardroom and the stage. The first one will change how you run your meetings. The second one, it's the reason that you keep losing people that you thought were happy and comfortable. And the third one, the one that most leaders do not want to hear, is about what you are doing every day that is actually killing the motivation your team already has. Now back to that C-130 and Zach, that quiet, hesitant reserve loadmaster. You see, he sat in the back and sat quietly in every brief. I tried what most leaders tried. I pulled him aside, figured I'd give him the "I need you engaged" pep talk, tell him how important this mission is, and tell him what exactly I need him to do. But unbeknownst to me, that didn't do anything for this young man. And then there was this one night before we had a combat mission flying into Iraq, and I decided that I would do something different. Instead of briefing at him, instead of telling him everything that I need, I asked Zach a question, bringing him into the conversation and asking him how things were going and asking him what he needed from me and how I could help him to be a better version of himself and how I could help him to help us to get the mission accomplished. Zach decided that he would walk me through everything that he had already done. He began to show me what was done right, what we could have done differently, what we could have done better. He began to walk me through the numbers in the book, showing me, hey, this is how it's done if we do it by the book. This is how we can actually do it on the ground. This is what we can do to do it faster. This is what it looks like if we want to get it done twice as fast. If you and the other pilots and the rest of the crew get involved and get engaged and help me with reconfiguring this aircraft. And in that moment, what I realized is that I had now engaged him directly. I had now asked Zach about himself, and I now began to understand his motivation. His whole body changed. He got excited. He started leaning into that conversation because I was talking to him and I was talking with him. And I began to actually ask him a little bit more about who he was, took an interest in him, and understood his motivation. That night changed me forever in understanding how do I deal with team members of mine that actually have some internal motivation that I've just been missing. This guy, he quoted the book numbers and he gave me all kind of guidelines and showed me all kind of things that were necessary. What I realized is that it turns out he was not disengaged, he wasn't uninterested, but he was actually waiting for me, waiting for the aircraft commander, waiting for someone to take an interest in him and actually care about him as a person. When I thought about it and I reviewed it, I realized I had been trying to push motivation into and down to him. Turns out the motivation, it was already there. I wasn't actually looking for it in the right places. In that moment, it gave me a reflection and it reminded me of what I had gone through in pilot training. training, how it felt to constantly be yelled at and how it felt when no one really cared about me as a person. And now I realized that I had been doing that same thing to Zach. And that was my wake-up call to change how I approach conversations. How many of you have someone on your team right now, someone that you may be written off as they're not motivated, they're not interested, they don't care, and you just chosen not to engage them directly, not to bring them into the conversation, not to find out who they are, and not to be interested in them? Maybe it's that guy in the warehouse who clocks in and clocks out and he never says a word in a daily brief or the safety briefing. Maybe it's one of your field techs who does solid work, but they never volunteer for anything extra. What if it's not that they're not motivated? What if they just haven't been asked the right question? What if you just not taken the time to take an interest in them? Perhaps we have been so focused on saying the right things when in all actuality, we should be focused on actually being interested in each of them as individuals. Most companies, what they do is they try to motivate people from the top down. They try to send newsletters, they create these random town halls, these incentive programs, but motivation, that isn't what you broadcast. You don't broadcast motivation. Motivation, it's a frequency, and every person on your team, they are tuned to their individual frequency. And as a leader, you have to understand that your role is not to operate on a single frequency, it's to understand how to tap into each of your people's frequency individualistically and connect with them. Yes, you connect with the group, but you also need to connect with the individuals and connect with the frequency that they're operating from. See, some people that they're driven by challenge, you'll learn. Some people are driven by security to be able to take care of their family, the benefits that the job offers in addition to the pay. Some people are driven by recognition, not a plaque on the wall, not some random stuff, just someone approaching them and saying, I see you and I see who you are and I see what you provide to our team and I want you to know that you matter. If you're broadcasted on that one single frequency and you're wondering why more than half your team is not picking up the signal, problem is not your team. It's you. As a leader, you have to take the time to get to know your people. You've got to take the time to understand what motivates your people and what makes your people tick. That is the difference between being a great leader and somebody who just shows up and checks the boxes. That's how you earn your title of leader every single day. You understand what gets your people excited. And when you connect with people at the core like this, it becomes easier and it becomes automatic and organic to be able to motivate them in an authentic and organic type of way. Here's what I learned. Motivation is not something that you just install in people. It is something that you discover. Every person on your team, they showed up on day one with fire in their gut, fire in their souls. Something made them need and want that job that they're doing right now. Something made them show up. Your job is not to light that fire that they already showed up with. Your job is to stop putting that fire out. And the first step is simple. Stop assuming that you know what drives them and start asking them what drives them. So here's my question for you today. When was the last time you sat down with each person on your team, not to talk about performance reports or metrics, but to ask them what actually gets them fired up about the work? If you can't remember, that is your answer. One thing that I recommend the clients that I coach is I recommend that they conduct a stay assessment. Oftentimes what we learn is that companies, they attempt to conduct an exit assessment. They want to see why people are leaving. Well, at that point, it's too late. What if instead of conducting an exit survey, an exit assessment, what if you conducted a stay survey, a stay assessment, and understand why do people continue to stay with your organization? Why do people continue to stay with your team and your company? This will give you far more insight than any exit interview will ever give you. For me, I've been doing these daddy-daughter donut dates for quite a long time now. My daughter's almost 10, and we actually started daddy-daughter donut dates when she was just 2 years old. Every Friday morning, we'd hop in the car for daycare, and on the way to daycare, we would stop at a donut shop. At first, she just licked the frosting off, and over time, what ended up happening is those 20 minutes, they became one of the most important parts of my week. Not because of the donuts. Of course, I had to work out to make sure I didn't get fat because of the donuts, but they became important because I learned who my daughter was. She began to learn who I was and learn that I was going to be there for her. I began to understand what scared her. I began to understand what excited her. And I began to understand what she needed from me as her father, as her dad. And some of those things she would never say out loud unless I took the time for us to be sitting there in those moments over donuts. That made a difference. You can only imagine what you could learn sitting there with a child over a maple bacon donut. I realized that I had actually been doing this with people in the past under my leadership, but it was subconscious. subconscious and unconsciously, and I wasn't intentional about it. And when I realized that I was going to be taking over as a squadron commander, I realized that I could be more intentional with this idea, this concept of donut moments and donut conversations, and that I could leverage this as a commander to have these donut moments, have these donut conversations, and be interested in them and not be focused on trying to be the most interesting person in the room. I started with this idea of how do I be intentional with these donut moments as a squadron commander? And I started to have these conversations with each of my team members at every opportunity that I got. It wasn't about a performance review. It wasn't about just the meetings, but this was about showing up and being curious and interested in who they were. On one of these conversations, one of the members of my squadron, a person that rarely spoke up much, they told me over coffee and donuts that they were thinking about getting out of the military. They weren't thinking about getting out of it because of the work or because it was hard, but because nobody ever cared to ask about who she was on a personal level. Nobody ever showed that they cared about anything about her beyond her position. And no one ever inquired about what her career goals were and what career goals she had. No one wanted or chose to connect with her beyond that title. That conversation, it kept that young lady in the military for at least another 4 years. It only cost me the investment of my time and enjoying a great conversation over a cup of coffee and some donuts. In the various companies that I work with, the number one reason that good people leave, it's not money. It isn't workload. It is that they do not feel that anyone even gives a damn about them beyond what they can produce for them. Did you know that our research showed that 77% of working Americans, they will leave a company if they don't trust their leadership? That number should terrify every leader watching this right now. You want to build trust and unlock someone's motivation? Connect with them first. Not in a corporate open door policy kind of way, but connect with them in a real human, I actually care about who you are as a person kind of way. Here's the reason why. Connection leads to commitment. Commitment will lead to accountability, and the accountability will lead to a level of trust, a level of mutual trust between both individuals. That is the chain of how this process works. But most leaders, they want to start with accountability and they wonder why no one is buying in. You can't hold someone accountable who does not feel connected to you, does not feel connected to the organization, does not feel connected to the mission, vision, and values. Yes, they will comply, but compliance is far from commitment. And compliance is not motivation. Compliance is survival. This is what I call the motivation misconception. Leaders think they need better incentives, better speeches, better programs, but what they actually need is they need better relationships. And what I want you to understand is that connection is not a soft skill. It is the ignition system for everything else. Without connection, without it, you are turning a key in a car with no engine. And here's the thing, connection does not take a budget. It takes presence, the investment of your time. It takes curiosity, being interested in them. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes, a cup of coffee, and a donut. Here's what I want you to think about. Do your people comply because they have to, or do they commit because they want to? If you're getting compliance but not commitment, you don't have a motivation problem. You have a connection problem. I want you to go back to that day that I've talked about so often at Baghdad International Airport. I'm on a night vision, flying that C-130, descending through 20,000 feet in complete darkness, aided by night vision goggles. We're 1 mile away from the runway. We're 300 feet above the ground. And as the throttles are nearing the auto detent and I'm configuring for a landing, that loadmaster in the back, that young 19-year-old loadmaster says 2 words, go around. In that moment that loadmaster says go around, I don't pause, I don't hesitate. I immediately add full throttles. I bring the nose of the aircraft to 7 degrees nose high, and I begin to climb away from the ground, climbing away from whatever the danger is that young person in the back of my airplane is alerting me to. And it's not until we're at a safe altitude that I then ask that loadmaster, why did we go around? That loadmaster, they will say, pilot, the reason that I commanded you to go around, the reason I interrupted everything that you were doing was because I was able to see something that you were unaware of. That young person, they have an awareness that I don't have. And in your organizations, you have people that have an awareness that you don't have. And that young person saved our entire crew that night. Not because I had gave them the old pep talk, but it's because we had built an environment where they knew their voice mattered. They knew we're speaking up. It wasn't just allowed, it was expected of them. And if we had created a culture where that young person in the back of that airplane was afraid to interrupt, contradict, and assert themselves over that aircraft commander, today we wouldn't be having a conversation because I wouldn't be here. Who are the loadmasters that are in your organization? Those people that are close to the work who see the things that you will never see from your office. boss. Your drivers, your line workers, your field techs, your nurses, your warehouse staff. These are the people that are close to the work. They see the problems before they ever hit your dashboard. And here's what kills their motivation faster than anything. When they speak up and nothing happens. When they raise a concern and they're ignored. When they offer an idea and they hear things like, that's not how we do it here, or we've always done it this way. See, you don't have to agree with everything your people say, but if your people believe that their voice doesn't matter, they will stop using it. And when they stop speaking up, they stop caring. And that isn't disengagement. That is self-preservation. There's a quote by Colin Powell that I really, really love that talks about this. And he says, the day your soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. They have either lost confidence that you could help or concluded you do not care. Either case is a failure of leadership. The companies that have the highest engagement and the lowest turnover, it's not the ones with the best perks. The companies that have that level of low turnover and highest engagement, they're the ones where their frontline people feel heard and feel seen, where psychological safety is real, and it's not just some random poster in the break room or some random buzzword. Here's the hardest truth in this video. The biggest motivation killing your organization is not low pay, it's not long hours, and it's not the work itself. It's feeling as though nobody is listening. Psychological safety, it is defined as the belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. When your people have that level of comfort, you don't need to motivate them. They'll motivate themselves and they'll use that internal motivation that they already have because they know their contribution matter. They know that their voice counts, and they trust that when they say go around, someone is going to listen and someone is going to take action. Ask yourself this: if the youngest, lowest ranking person on your team saw something dangerous, something wrong, something that could cost you, would they speak up? Would they feel safe enough to challenge you? Would they feel safe enough to challenge the leadership in the organization? If the answer is not an immediate yes, you don't have a motivation problem. You have a trust problem. And there's no pizza party or mandatory fun or mandatory team building exercise that's going to fix that. So now as I prepare to land this plane, so to speak, your people are already motivated. Stop trying to install something that's already there and start discovering what drives each individual on your team. Connection isn't optional. It's the ignition system for commitment, accountability, and trust. And if you want to keep that motivation alive, build an environment where your people know that their voice matters, where the load masters in the back of the aircraft are not afraid to call a go around. That young loadmaster in Baghdad over Iraq, they didn't save the mission because I gave a good speech. They saved the mission because we built a crew, we built an environment where that 19-year-old felt safe enough to overrule and assert themselves in the conversation with the aircraft commander, with the leader of that aircraft. That is what trust can build, and that is what trust does. And that is what is available to every leader watching this video right now. If you want to go deeper on this, I've got a free guide called The 7 Skill Sets of No-Fail Trust. It breaks down the specific skills you need to build this kind of culture. The link is in the description. And if this hits home, subscribe. I'm putting out great content every week for leaders who are done with being average and ready to build teams that actually perform. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Blue skies, fair winds, and all the best.